The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days when Alexander Monroe's world fell silent. Not the kind of silence that follows a storm, but the kind that burrows into your soul and makes everything sound distant, muted, like life itself had turned away. He stood by the hospital window, staring at the endless city skyline. Manhattan lights blinked like indifferent stars, and inside, the beeping of machines formed the only rhythm he could still recognize. His 7-year-old daughter, Lily, lay motionless on the bed. Her chest rose and fell, but her eyes, the ones that used to light up the room with laughter, stared blankly at nothing. "She's physically fine," the lead neurologist had said that morning, his voice tinged with confusion and defeat. "There's no brain damage, no trauma. She just doesn't speak. We've run every test." Alexander didn't want to hear that. Billionaires weren't used to words like impossible. When you built empires from scratch, when your name could move markets and presidents called you by first name, "no" was a sound you refused to acknowledge. He had built Monroe Global from the ground up, steel, technology, and finance woven into a network of power stretching across continents. But for all his billions, all his influence, he couldn't buy the sound of his daughter's laughter again. "Find someone," he said coldly to his assistant that evening. "Anyone who can fix her." Within a week, the Monroe mansion on the Hudson River turned into something that looked more like a private clinic than a home. Doctors from around the world arrived. Neurologists, psychologists, psychiatrists, speech therapists, even spiritual healers. Alexander had one rule: no one leaves until my daughter speaks. They tried everything: hypnosis, immersive therapy, music, play. But Lily stayed quiet. She blinked, she moved, she ate, but not a single word escaped her lips. When asked why she didn't speak, she simply looked away, her small hands clutching a worn-out stuffed rabbit, the last toy her mother had given her before the accident. Alexander avoided thinking about that night. The screech of tires, the flash of headlights, the blood, his wife's last whisper, "Take care of her." Now, 2 years later, that promise had turned into an obsession. He would spend nights pacing through the vast, echoing hallways of his mansion, hearing his own footsteps mock him. "All this money, all this power, and I can't fix my own child." He blamed the doctors, he blamed God. But deep down, he blamed himself. Sometimes, he'd sit by her bed at night, just watching. "Lily," he'd whisper, "Daddy's here. You can talk to me, sweetheart." Her eyes would flutter, but no sound came. He didn't notice the housekeeper standing quietly by the door, tears forming in her eyes. By the end of the year, the number of specialists who'd walked through the Monroe mansion reached 103. Alexander had flown them in from Switzerland, Japan, Israel. Wherever hope was rumored to exist. Some stayed days, some months. None succeeded. And as time passed, Lily's silence became heavier, not just the absence of words but a wall shutting out the world. One winter morning, Alexander stood by the window, watching snowflakes gather on the marble steps outside. He felt exhausted, not physically but spiritually drained. He thought about selling the house, moving somewhere quieter, maybe France. Somewhere he could forget that his fortune couldn't touch what mattered most. Then he saw him. A man in an orange vest, pushing a broom along the driveway. The city had sent extra cleaners after a storm, and one of them was sweeping near the gates. He moved slowly, humming softly to himself, his motions gentle and rhythmic. Something about the sound, a low, comforting hum, drifted through the cold air and, somehow, through the walls of the mansion. Inside, Lily sat near the window, her small face pressed against the glass. She was watching him. It was the first time Alexander had seen her look at anything with genuine curiosity in months. He walked toward her carefully. "What are you looking at, sweetheart?" She didn't answer, but she didn't turn away either. Her eyes stayed fixed on the man outside. Alexander followed her gaze and frowned. The man was clearly from the city maintenance department. His clothes were worn, his gloves had holes, his hair was streaked with gray, and his beard was untamed. But there was something peaceful about him, something no one inside that mansion had carried in years. "Do you want to go outside?" he asked softly. For the first time in 2 years, Lily blinked twice, her way of saying yes. That afternoon, wrapped in a woolen coat and scarf, Lily stepped outside. The street cleaner looked up, surprised to see a little girl standing by the gate. He smiled, his eyes crinkling. "Cold out here, huh, little miss?" She didn't answer, but she didn't run either. He leaned on his broom. "You like snow?" She nodded faintly. He chuckled. "Me too. It covers the world's mess for a bit. Makes everything look new." She tilted her head, watching him. Her hand slowly reached down and touched the snow on the fence. Then, in a small, almost inaudible sound, she exhaled, a sigh that carried something alive. The man didn't speak again. He just went back to sweeping, humming softly. And from the window above, Alexander Monroe froze. He'd heard that sound, the tiny sigh, and his heart nearly stopped. He turned to his assistant. "Get me that man's name." That night Alexander couldn't sleep. He replayed the moment again and again. Lily standing in the snow, the man humming. It made no sense. He'd spent millions on specialists, and yet one ordinary street cleaner had drawn something out of her in seconds. The next morning, he called the city maintenance office. "Who was cleaning near the Monroe estate yesterday?" They told him the man's name was Samuel Carter, a 56-year-old who'd been with the department for 15 years. No records of higher education, no medical background, just a janitor, a street sweeper. Alexander couldn't understand it, and he didn't like not understanding. He ordered his driver to find Samuel and bring him in. By noon, Samuel stood in the grand marble foyer of the Monroe mansion, looking around awkwardly. The house gleamed, every surface polished, every corner perfect. Yet the air felt heavy as if laughter had been exiled long ago. Alexander stepped forward, his voice sharp. "You spoke to my daughter yesterday." Samuel nodded slowly. "Didn't say much, sir, just talked about snow." Alexander studied him. The rough hands, the worn boots, the steady eyes. "She reacted to you. That hasn't happened in years." Samuel looked uncomfortable. "She just needed someone who didn't expect her to talk, sir." "Sometimes silence understands silence." Alexander frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" Samuel shrugged. "Sometimes words scare people more than quiet does. Maybe she's waiting for someone who listens different." The billionaire didn't reply. But as Samuel turned to leave, Lily's soft footsteps echoed down the hallway. She stopped beside her father and looked directly at the man with the broom. Her lips parted slightly, no sound yet, but there was something in her eyes. Recognition. Trust, and for the first time in years, Alexander Monroe, the man who could buy anything, felt something he hadn't felt in forever. Hope. The Monroe mansion was unlike any home. It was a monument to wealth, rising like a glass fortress above the Hudson River. Inside, corridors stretched endlessly, filled with marble, art and silence. The kind of silence that didn't soothe. The kind that swallowed echoes. Every morning Alexander would sit in the West Wing dining hall. A table meant for 20, now hosting only 2 plates, one for him, one untouched. Lily sat at the far end, her small fingers playing with crumbs, her eyes unfocused. The maid placed her favorite breakfast before her, strawberries, sliced neatly, just the way her mother used to do, but she didn't eat. She just stared, lost somewhere unreachable. Alexander's assistant, Marcus, walked in holding a file. "Sir, the next specialist arrives at 10. Dr. Elise Kramer, child psychiatrist from Zurich. Highly recommended." Alexander barely looked up. "The last 10 were highly recommended." "Yes, sir, but..." "No," Alexander said flatly. "Just do whatever she needs. Tests, therapy, anything. If she can get Lily to speak, I'll build her a hospital." Marcus nodded, though his eyes revealed doubt. At exactly 10, the private jet from Switzerland landed at Teterboro. Dr. Elise Kramer was everything one expected from a high-profile European therapist. Precise, composed eyes that analyzed every movement. She spent 2 hours with Lily that morning, then another 2. By noon, she emerged from the playroom looking puzzled. Alexander was waiting outside, pretending not to be anxious. "Well," Dr. Kramer sighed. "She's not resisting therapy, Mr. Monroe, she's beyond it. Her silence isn't defiance, it's protection." "Protection from what?" Kramer hesitated. "From pain. Something traumatic locked her voice away. When she remembers why and feels safe enough, she'll speak again. But that safety can't be bought, it has to be felt." Alexander's jaw tightened. "You're saying I can't buy her voice back?" "I'm saying love doesn't follow invoices," Dr. Kramer replied softly. He didn't like that answer either. Over the next few months, specialists came and went, one after another, like actors in a performance that had lost meaning. Each one tried something new: music therapy, animal therapy, painting, dance. Lily complied, quietly, gracefully, but she never spoke. She was polite to everyone, but her eyes carried something ancient, something far older than a child's heart should hold. When the house fell quiet at night, Alexander sometimes heard faint humming from her room. Not words, but little melodies, ghosts of a voice once full of joy. He'd stand by her door, not daring to interrupt. The house had begun to change too. The staff whispered less. The laughter that once filled the halls, from maids, chefs and security guards, had disappeared. Everything felt clinical, sterile. Even Christmas that year was hollow, a massive tree, gifts under it, but no laughter to unwrap them. Alexander bought the most expensive dollhouse in the world, handmade in Italy, real gold hinges on the doors. Lily looked at it once, then turned away. That night, he threw a glass of whiskey into the fire. "Why won't you come back to me?" he whispered to the flames. The answer was only the crackling of burning logs. Then came Samuel again, the street cleaner. He wasn't supposed to be there. The city crew usually came on Mondays, not Thursdays. But that morning Alexander saw him through the window, humming as he swept the snow from the driveway. Lily, as always, was sitting by the window in her playroom, sketching silently. But when she saw him, her pencil paused mid-stroke. A faint smile, the first in months, touched her lips. Alexander noticed. He didn't understand it, but he noticed. He stood, walked outside, and approached the gate. Samuel straightened up when he saw him. "Morning, sir." Alexander's tone was cool, guarded. "I thought your schedule was Monday." "Storm pushed some routes around," Samuel said, brushing snow off his gloves. "Didn't want the path frozen. Kids could slip. My daughter doesn't go outside." "Maybe she should," Samuel said without hesitation. "Cold air can wake the heart." Alexander frowned. He wasn't used to being spoken to like that, not by men with brooms. But something in Samuel's calmness disarmed him. "You seem to think you understand my daughter better than 100 doctors," Alexander said. Samuel shook his head. "No, sir, I just don't try to fix her." Alexander stared, unsure whether to be angry or intrigued. That evening, Lily did something no one expected. As the snow began to fall, she tugged at her father's sleeve and pointed toward the window, toward the gate where Samuel was still sweeping. Alexander blinked. "You want to go outside?" She nodded once firmly. The staff hurried to get her coat, scarf, boots. When she stepped into the snow, the wind bit at her cheeks, but she didn't care. She walked slowly, her little boots crunching through the white path. Samuel stopped sweeping, smiled softly, and leaned on his broom. "Well, hello again, little miss," he said gently. Lily looked up, eyes wide. "See that?" Samuel pointed at the sky. "Snowflakes never fall the same way twice. Even the sky likes being creative." Lily tilted her head, following the snow with her eyes. Her lips parted slightly, like she wanted to say something. But nothing came. Just the smallest exhale, visible in the cold air. Samuel didn't push her, he simply nodded as though he'd heard her anyway. Alexander watched from a distance, something heavy tightening in his chest. It was such a simple thing. A man talking about snow. But in that simplicity, Lily looked more alive than she had in years. Later that night, as the mansion lights dimmed, Alexander found himself thinking about Samuel's words. "I just don't try to fix her." He'd built a world around fixing. Fixing companies, fixing markets, fixing people. It was how he survived. But maybe that was the problem. Maybe Lily didn't need another repairman. She needed someone who'd just be there without expectations. It was an idea he couldn't accept, not yet. But it stayed with him like a quiet ache. Over the next few days, Alexander noticed small changes. Lily began drawing again, not abstract colors or random lines, but actual shapes. One morning she showed him a picture she'd drawn: a man with a broom, a child in a coat, snow falling all around them. She didn't explain it, didn't have to. The doctors noticed too. "She's responding to external emotional stimuli," one said. "Perhaps this man, this janitor, represents a sense of safety or grounding." Alexander frowned. "You're telling me the man sweeping my driveway is doing more than you?" The doctor hesitated. "Sometimes healing doesn't wear a lab coat, Mr. Monroe." Alexander dismissed him immediately, but the words lingered. A week later, Lily did something extraordinary. While sitting by the piano, her mother's old piano, she pressed a few keys, softly, almost shyly. It was the melody of a lullaby her mother used to sing before bed. Samuel had been right outside the window again that day, humming the same tune. When Alexander heard it, his throat tightened. He rushed to her side, kneeling. "Lily, sweetheart, did you just?" She looked up at him, eyes bright, but still silent. Then she reached out and placed her hand on his cheek. It wasn't speech, but it was connection. And for Alexander, that was enough to shatter the stone around his heart. He turned to Marcus that evening. "Bring Samuel Carter inside tomorrow." Marcus looked startled. "Inside, sir?" "Yes," Alexander said quietly. "He's not just a cleaner. I don't know what he is yet, but I think he's the only one who's reaching her." And as snow fell over the Monroe estate that night, the world outside glowed with soft light. While inside, for the first time in years, Alexander dared to believe that the impossible might not be impossible after all. The Monroe mansion had never felt emptier. It was strange considering how many people worked there. A dozen maids, a personal chef, 2 chauffiers, 3 security guards, and a rotating list of doctors who moved through its corridors like ghosts. Yet every sound seemed to die the moment it began. Every laugh, every word swallowed by marble and money. Alexander used to love that silence. It meant control. Now, it only reminded him of loss. He spent his mornings in the East Study pretending to work. Financial reports, contracts, acquisitions. All the things that once thrilled him now blurred together. He'd catch himself staring out the window, watching the driveway, waiting for the orange vest of the street cleaner. Waiting for him. That following Monday, Samuel Carter arrived again, broom over his shoulder, whistling as he walked up the path. His breath puffed white clouds into the cold air. Alexander was already by the window with his coffee, pretending not to notice that his heart lifted. Moments later, Lily appeared beside him as if drawn by invisible thread. She pressed her small palm against the glass, her reflection ghosting over the world outside. Her eyes followed Samuel's every move. "Would you like to go out, Lily?" Alexander asked softly. She nodded, then did something new. She tugged on his sleeve, urging him to come too. That simple gesture nearly brought tears to his eyes. When they stepped outside, the cold nipped at their cheeks. Snow crunched beneath their boots. Samuel paused, broom in hand, and grinned. "Morning, boss." "Little miss." Lily smiled faintly, her first real smile in years. Alexander, uncomfortable but curious, nodded. "Morning." Samuel gestured toward the ground. "Ever notice how snow makes everything quiet, sir? Like the world's taking a deep breath." Alexander followed his gaze. The driveway, the trees, even the statues seemed softer under the snow's weight. "I've never thought of it that way," he said. Samuel chuckled. "That's the trouble with rich folks. You all forget how to look simple." Alexander blinked. unsure whether to take offense or agree. But before he could respond, Lily knelt down and began scooping snow into her mittens, shaping something carefully. Samuel crouched beside her. "What's that you're building, little miss?" She didn't answer, but she pointed to him, then back to the snow, trying to mimic the broom in miniature. Samuel laughed. "Well, I'll be. That's me, isn't it?" Lily smiled wider, nodding shyly. Alexander stood still, watching, his chest tightening with emotion he couldn't name. For 2 years he had thrown money at the world, demanding it heal his daughter. But in 5 minutes of simple kindness, a street cleaner had done more than all his wealth combined. When they went back inside, Lily ran to her art corner and began drawing furiously, crayons scratching across paper. Alexander followed quietly, still lost in thought. She finished the picture and held it up. It was crude but unmistakable. A man sweeping snow under falling flakes, and beside him, a little girl holding his hand. Her eyes flicked up to her father's as if asking, "Do you see what I see?" He knelt beside her, voice trembling. "That's beautiful, sweetheart." She didn't speak. Not yet, but she reached out and placed the drawing into his hand. For the first time, Alexander felt that her silence wasn't emptiness, it was communication in another language, one he was finally learning to understand. That evening the house seemed lighter. The air carried warmth instead of weight. Even the staff noticed. The head maid whispered to Marcus, "She smiled today. Did you see it?" The little one smiled. Marcus nodded. And Mr. Monroe didn't yell once. Miracles are happening. They both laughed quietly, unaware that Alexander could hear them from the hallway. He didn't mind. For once, he wanted people to talk about joy in his house again. The next morning he made a decision. He invited Samuel Carter to come inside, not as a servant, not as a charity case, but as a guest. When the older man arrived, his eyes widened at the grandeur. Chandeliers glittering above, marble floors shining like mirrors. He stood awkwardly near the entrance, holding his broom as though it didn't belong. Alexander motioned toward the living room. "Please, sit." Samuel looked uncertain. "You sure, sir? I'm not much of a furniture man." Alexander gave a faint smile. "Then just stand. I want to thank you." "Thank me?" "Yes." Alexander gestured toward the hallway. "She's smiling again, that's you." Samuel shifted uneasily. "No, sir, that's her. All I did was listen." Alexander tilted his head. "You keep saying that. Listening. What does that even mean?" Samuel thought for a long moment before answering. "You ever sit by a river and just let it talk?" Alexander frowned. "Rivers don't talk." "That's what you think," Samuel said, smiling. "They talk just fine. You just don't use your ears right. Same with people who hurt deep. They ain't broken. They're just speaking in quiet ways most folks are too loud to hear." Alexander leaned back silent. The simplicity of it struck him harder than any medical explanation ever had. Over the next week, Samuel became a quiet fixture in their lives. He would still sweep the driveway, but he also joined Lily in her small adventures, watching her draw, or helping her pile sticks for tiny snow shelters. Once, when she pointed toward a frozen puddle, Samuel stomped on it gently, laughing at the cracking sound. She giggled audibly, a soft, melodic sound that froze Alexander in his tracks. He turned to Marcus. "Did you hear that?" Marcus smiled faintly. "I did." She laughed. Marcus nodded. "Yes, sir, she did." Alexander felt tears burn behind his eyes. He hadn't cried since the funeral. That night, as Lily slept peacefully, Alexander sat in his office, staring at the photo on his desk. His late wife Grace smiling with Lily in her arms. He whispered into the dark, "You'd like him, Grace. He's nothing like us. That's probably why he works." He leaned back, closing his eyes, and for the first time in years, the silence in the mansion felt gentle, not cruel. But peace, as he would soon learn, never lasts long. Because the next morning, one of the doctors confronted him. "Mr. Monroe, with all due respect," said Dr. Hensley, the lead psychologist, "allowing a street cleaner to influence your daughter's therapy could be irresponsible." Alexander raised a brow. "Irresponsible? He's untrained, unlicensed, and successful." Alexander interrupted coldly. "You've had 6 months, he's had 1 week." The doctor flushed. "That's anecdotal progress. Not medical." Alexander's tone hardened. "I don't care if it's divine intervention. If my daughter's smiling, he stays." Dr. Hensley opened his mouth to argue. But the billionaire's stare silenced him faster than any word could. When the man left, Samuel happened to be walking by. He caught the tail end of the conversation but said nothing. Alexander turned toward him, exhaling. "They think I'm crazy." Samuel chuckled. "Takes a bit of crazy to build an empire, doesn't it?" Alexander smirked despite himself. "Maybe." Then Samuel said something that Alexander never forgot. "Money can build big houses, sir, but it can't make homes. That takes something smaller, like time or listening." That evening, Lily sat by the fireplace with Samuel, her sketchbook open. She pointed at one of her drawings. A small figure in the center surrounded by what looked like tall buildings. Then she drew a single heart beside the figure, placed her finger on it, and smiled. Samuel looked at her for a moment, then whispered, "That's you, huh? You're the little heart in the big city." She nodded slowly. Alexander watched from the doorway, his eyes damp again. Something deep inside him shifted that night. He realized that all his life, he'd tried to make the world quieter by buying silence, peace, obedience, control. But real silence wasn't about absence. It was about presence. About being with someone without needing anything back. For the first time since his wife's death, he felt that presence again. In a street cleaner's calm voice, in his daughter's faint smile, in the warmth flickering between them. The mansion wasn't empty anymore. It was beginning to breathe. The first time Samuel Carter walked through the Monroe mansion doors, he felt like he'd stepped into another world. The marble floors gleamed so bright he could see his own reflection. Not a sight he particularly enjoyed. His orange city vest looked out of place against the crystal chandeliers and oil paintings worth more than his entire lifetime of earnings. Still, when he saw Lily running down the hallway toward him, her small boots squeaking, he forgot about everything else. She stopped a few feet away, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Her eyes were bright, her smile shy. Then she reached out and tugged lightly on his sleeve, motioning toward the garden. "She wants you to go outside," Alexander said from behind, watching carefully. Samuel nodded. "Only if she promises to show me her favorite tree." Lily nodded once, turned, and led the way, her little boots leaving prints on the wet stone. Outside, the winter sun was weak but warm enough to soften the snow. The garden sparkled. The fountain frozen in mid-splash, icicles hanging like glass fingers. Samuel watched her run ahead, hair glinting in the pale light. She stopped near a large oak tree and looked up. The bare branches reached skyward like veins against a white sky. "That's her favorite," Alexander said, his breath visible in the cold air. "Her mother used to read under it every summer." Samuel nodded, sensing the weight behind those words. Lily placed her rabbit carefully on the ground and began building a small pile of snow beneath the tree. Then she picked up a twig and drew something in the snow, slow, deliberate strokes. Samuel leaned closer. It was a heart. He smiled. "That's a good one." Lily looked up at him and pointed at the heart, then at him, then back at her father. Alexander's throat tightened. "She's saying," he whispered, barely able to finish. "You helped her heart." Samuel's voice softened. "No, sir. She just found the part of it that still works." From that day Samuel became a daily visitor, though he never called it work. He called it being around. He never lectured Lily, never tried to coax words out of her. Sometimes he swept the path while she followed him with a tiny toy broom of her own. Other times, he'd sit on the steps, telling simple stories. About pigeons that stole his lunch, or how the sunrise looked different every day if you bothered to notice. She would sit beside him quietly, sketching as he talked. Occasionally, Alexander would join them, pretending to be busy with phone calls that didn't matter. He just wanted to listen. One afternoon, while Samuel was sweeping near the gate, Alexander approached him with a folder. "I've had my people look into you," Alexander said plainly. Samuel didn't look surprised. "I figured you might. You're 56, divorced, no kids. Used to be a school janitor. You left that job 15 years ago." Samuel nodded. "That's about right." Alexander's eyes narrowed. "Why? Why leave a stable job for street sweeping?" Samuel looked out toward the frozen river before answering. "Lost my son." Alexander froze. He was 10. Samuel continued, his voice quiet. "Car accident. I was working late that day, fixing a heater at the school. Missed his last baseball game. Guilt's a heavy broom to carry, sir. Couldn't stay around classrooms after that. Too many ghosts." Alexander swallowed hard. "I'm sorry." Samuel smiled faintly. "You don't need to be. I made peace with it. Took me a while to realize, sometimes healing doesn't mean forgetting. It just means finding someone else to listen to." He glanced toward the house, where Lily's small face peeked from the window, watching them. "She listens better than most adults I know," he said. "Even when she doesn't speak." Alexander followed his gaze. For a moment, they stood in silence, two men from completely different worlds, bound by the same invisible wound. Later that week Samuel began teaching Lily little tricks of the trade. He showed her how to sweep in long strokes so dust didn't rise too high, how to balance a broom on one finger, how to whistle while working so time passed faster. Lily giggled silently, eyes sparkling. She tried to whistle back, failing miserably but grinning the whole time. Alexander caught them once and couldn't help smiling. "You're teaching my daughter how to sweep, Mr. Carter." Samuel winked. "Every queen should know how to keep her castle clean." Lily laughed again, a breathy sound, half giggle, half whisper, but unmistakably alive. Word of Samuel's presence spread among the staff. Some thought it was beautiful, a miracle unfolding in slow motion. Others whispered doubts. "He's just a janitor," one of the doctors muttered. "What could he possibly understand about trauma?" But results spoke louder than titles. Within weeks Lily's progress astonished everyone. She began humming tunes from the piano again. She'd draw pictures and leave them under her father's door each night. Pictures of stars, trees, and sometimes 3 stick figures, one tall, one small, and one holding a broom. Alexander kept every single one. One morning, Alexander found Samuel sitting on the back porch, sipping tea from a chipped thermos. "Do you know?" Alexander said quietly. I've spent over $50 million on doctors. And none of them could do what you're doing. Samuel chuckled. That's because they were chasing the wrong thing, sir. They were chasing her voice. I just listened to her silence. Alexander frowned thoughtfully. You make it sound so simple. It is simple, Samuel said. Just not easy. He paused, looking at Alexander. You ever talk to her about her mother? Alexander stiffened. I can't. I don't want to hurt her more. Maybe she's waiting for you to, Samuel said softly. Sometimes silence is just love waiting for permission. Alexander looked down, his eyes clouding. He hadn't spoken his wife's name aloud in over 2 years. Grace. The word itself hurt, like glass in his throat. That night, Alexander sat on Lily's bed while she drew. He hesitated, then whispered, Do you remember Mommy's favorite song? Lily froze mid-stroke. Her eyes lifted to his. He continued, voice trembling. The one she used to sing at bedtime. About the stars that never go away. Her eyes shimmered. Slowly she nodded. Alexander took a shaky breath and began to hum the tune, rough, broken, but true. Lily stared at him, her lip quivering. Then, without warning, she dropped her pencil, crawled into his lap and buried her face in his chest. He held her tightly, heartbreaking and healing at the same time. And though she didn't say a word, he heard it. The sound beneath the silence. The one that said everything. The next day, Samuel found Lily sitting by the fountain, eyes closed, listening to the frozen water. He sat beside her quietly. After a few minutes she reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a small folded note and handed it to him. Samuel opened it carefully. Inside was a single crayon drawing, 3 figures again, standing under the oak tree. But this time there was a speech bubble drawn near her own figure. It said just one word, thanks. Samuel's throat tightened. He looked up at her, smiling. You're welcome, sweetheart. She smiled, and for the first time, her lips parted just slightly, like she might actually speak. But she didn't, not yet. Still, the world around her felt ready for it. When Alexander saw the drawing later, his hands trembled. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He found Samuel in the garden again, broom in hand. You did something no doctor could, he said quietly. You gave her hope. Samuel shook his head. She already had hope, sir. She just needed a little space to remember it. Alexander exhaled slowly, the cold air turning to mist. You're not staying a cleaner forever, are you? Samuel grinned. I go where I'm needed. But for now, I reckon I'm right where I should be. That night snow began to fall again. Lily watched it from her window, her breath fogging the glass. Then she whispered. So faint it was almost a breath. Beautiful. The word vanished into the quiet before anyone else could hear. But Samuel, sweeping outside, looked up suddenly. He didn't know why. Only that the night felt different. The impossible was beginning. The next morning, the air around the Monroe mansion felt different. Not warmer, not louder, just lighter. It was as if something invisible had lifted from the walls. A silence broken not by sound but by hope. Lily awoke early, before sunrise. She tiptoed to her window and pressed her small hand against the glass. Outside, the world was painted white. The snow that had fallen overnight lay thick and soft, muffling every sound except the whisper of the wind. She stared at the faint footprints in the driveway, Samuel's, leading to the front gate, and smiled. Then she whispered again. Beautiful. The word felt foreign in her mouth, but she liked it. It made her chest warm. By the time Alexander woke up, Samuel was already in the garden, sweeping the snow away from the stone paths. Morning, sir. Samuel greeted, his breath forming clouds in the cold. Alexander nodded, his voice husky from lack of sleep. Morning, Carter. You ever stop working? Samuel grinned. The day I stop moving is the day I stop living. Alexander almost smiled. Almost, but then he saw Lily standing at the door, bundled in her thick coat, watching them. Her eyes were brighter than usual. When she walked toward them, her steps were quick, almost eager. She stopped in front of Samuel, glanced at her father and then, in the softest, most fragile voice, whispered, Good morning. The broom fell from Samuel's hands. Alexander froze, not sure if he'd imagined it. Lily. She smiled shyly, eyes darting between them. Then she nodded and said again, a bit stronger this time, Good morning. For a moment time stood still. Alexander's vision blurred as tears welled up. He knelt, pulling her into his arms. You did it, baby. You spoke. Samuel turned away, pretending to focus on his broom, but his hands were shaking. When he looked back, Lily was already looking up at him. She mouthed one more word. One he didn't need to hear aloud to understand. Thank you. That day, the entire house buzzed with quiet celebration. The doctor nearly cried when he heard the news. The house staff exchanged smiles for the first time in months. Even the security guards at the gate stood taller, as if something sacred had been restored. But Samuel didn't stay for the commotion. He sat outside under the oak tree sipping tea from his old thermos. Snowflakes landed softly on his hat. He stared at the branches above, whispering, You see that, son? She found her voice. Over the next few weeks, Lily began to speak more slowly, cautiously, like a bird testing its wings. Her words were soft, often just 1 or 2 at a time, but they carried meaning. Tree, music, mama. But each word was a miracle. Alexander started to breathe easier. The weight in his chest began to lift. He and Lily would spend evenings at the piano, where he played while she hummed quietly beside him. One evening she whispered, "Sing, Daddy." He froze for a moment, overcome with emotion, but he did. His voice trembled, cracked, and yet, it filled the room like sunlight. For the first time since Grace's death there was laughter in the Monroe mansion, but not everyone was comfortable with the new bond between the billionaire's daughter and the street cleaner. One afternoon as Samuel swept the outer driveway, a black car pulled up, sleek, expensive, and uninvited. The window rolled down, revealing a woman with sharp cheekbones and colder eyes. "Mr. Carter," she said in a clipped tone. "I'm Dr. Evelyn Hargrove, Lily's behavioral consultant." Samuel nodded politely. "Afternoon, ma'am. I understand you've been spending a lot of time with my patient. Just keeping her company." Her lips thinned. "Mr. Monroe hired me for professional therapy. Not companionship from a janitor." Samuel didn't flinch. "Then maybe you ought to ask yourself why she's healing with me around." The woman's eyes narrowed. "I don't appreciate your tone, Mom," Samuel said calmly. "It's not a tone. It's truth." Before she could respond, the mansion doors opened and Alexander stepped out. "Dr. Hargrove," he greeted coolly. "If you've come to criticize, don't. My daughter spoke for the first time in 2 years last week, and the man responsible isn't you." The doctor looked offended. "Mr. Monroe, I must insist. You're dismissed," Alexander said simply. "Indefinitely." She opened her mouth to argue, but one look at his face silenced her. The car door slammed, and she sped off down the snowy road. That night, Alexander found Samuel sitting by the fireplace in the servants' quarters, quietly reading an old frayed notebook. "I fired her," Alexander said, leaning against the doorframe. "I figured," Samuel replied without looking up. "You didn't need to. I'm just doing what anyone would." Alexander shook his head. "No, Carter. You're not anyone." Samuel finally looked up, meeting his eyes. "Then what am I?" Alexander hesitated. "A friend, and maybe the reason my daughter's alive." Samuel smiled faintly. "Friends, huh? Haven't been called that in a long time." He closed his notebook. "You know, Mr. Monroe, sometimes I think healing's not about therapy or medicine, it's about being seen. That little girl didn't need a doctor. She needed someone who'd listen without trying to fix her." Alexander nodded slowly. "Maybe we all do." The next day, Lily had a surprise. When Samuel arrived, she ran toward him with something behind her back. Her cheeks were rosy from excitement. "What's this?" Samuel asked. She grinned and held up a small handmade sign. Painted in bright colors it said, "A Mr. Carter's Garden Club, members Lily and Daddy." Samuel chuckled. "Well now, guess I'm president of something fancy." Lily laughed, an actual laugh this time, and handed him a flower pot painted with little yellow stars. "I made it," she whispered proudly. Samuel's chest tightened. "It's beautiful, sweetheart." She smiled wider. "Beautiful," she echoed, repeating her first word. Over the following weeks, the garden club became a sacred ritual. Every morning the three of them would spend time outside, planting bulbs, clearing snow, talking softly. Lily's words grew stronger with each sunrise. Sometimes she'd ask Samuel questions. "Where's Sky Blue? You miss your son?" That last question hit hard. Samuel froze broom in mid-air. He didn't expect her to ask that. He knelt beside her, meeting her curious gaze. "Yes, sweetheart," he said gently. "I miss him every day." Lily nodded thoughtfully. "He in stars?" Samuel smiled faintly. "Yeah, I like to think so." She looked up at the sky for a long moment, then whispered, "Hey, happy now? You make me happy." Tears burned in Samuel's eyes. He couldn't answer, just pulled her close, holding her tiny frame like something sacred. That night, Alexander stood at his window, watching Samuel and Lily in the garden, their silhouettes illuminated by the golden porch light. He saw the way Samuel looked at her, not as a duty or a job, but as if she were something precious. Something that made the world worth living in. And Alexander knew, deep down, that no amount of money could ever repay this man. Later, when Samuel was about to leave for the night, Alexander stopped him at the gate. "Carter," he said, "you've changed everything for us. I want to make it official. I'll double your salary, give you a house on the estate, anything you want." Samuel smiled kindly. "I appreciate that, sir. But I already have what I came for." Alexander frowned. "And what's that?" Samuel looked toward Lily's window, where she waved goodnight with her little hand pressed to the glass. "Peace," he said softly. "Didn't know I'd find it again. But that girl," she gave it back. Inside, Lily whispered to her rabbit as she drifted off to sleep. "Tomorrow we plant more flowers. For Mr. Carter's son." And somewhere outside, under 1,000 quiet stars, a man who'd lost everything found his purpose again. Winter melted away slowly that year. The Monroe estate, once buried beneath endless snow, began to breathe again. Grass peeked through the frost. The air carried the scent of wet earth and promise. And in the middle of it all, in a garden that had been lifeless for years, color began to bloom. Tulips, daffodils, marigolds. Everywhere you looked, something living was growing again. Lily called it Mr. Carter's Magic Garden. Every morning, she'd tug on her father's hand, racing barefoot to the flower beds. Samuel would already be there, kneeling in the soil, humming quietly as he worked. He never arrived with fanfare or noise. Just steady presence, gentle hands, and a heart full of patience. "Good morning, sunshine," he'd greet Lily, his smile warm. She always answered softly now, "Good morning, Carter," but with a spark that made the words dance in the air. Alexander would stand a few feet away, coffee mug in hand, watching his daughter come alive again. Laughing, talking, asking questions about worms, clouds, and butterflies. Every time she laughed, something inside him healed a little more. That spring morning the sun was golden, spilling light over everything. Lily was busy pressing seeds into the soil when she suddenly asked, "Mr. Carter, when did you learn to grow flowers?" Samuel smiled, leaning back on his heels. "Long time ago. My wife loved flowers. Used to say they were the world's way of smiling." "Where is she?" Lily asked innocently. Samuel's hand stilled for a moment, his gaze softened. "She passed away, sweetheart." "A long time ago." Lily's small face fell. "Like my mama?" "Yeah," he whispered. "Just like your mama." There was silence between them, the quiet kind that doesn't hurt. Then Lily reached over and placed a tiny seed in his palm. "Then this one's for her." Samuel swallowed hard, his throat tightening. "Thank you, sweetheart." Alexander, standing nearby, turned away, pretending to sip his coffee. But his eyes glistened. Later that day as they worked, a soft breeze carried the sound of a song from somewhere deep in the house. The piano. Lily looked up. "Mama's song," she whispered. Without waiting for permission, she ran inside. Samuel and Alexander followed. They found her sitting at the piano bench, her small hands hovering over the keys. She pressed a few notes, the beginning of Grace's favorite lullaby. Her voice, faint but clear, followed the tune. "Sleep, little star in the arms of the sky." Alexander froze, his heart stuttered. He hadn't heard that voice since before the accident. Samuel stood silently near the doorway, hat pressed to his chest. Lily looked up midway through the song. "Daddy," she whispered, "sing with me." His throat tightened, but he did. His deep baritone joined her fragile melody, trembling with emotion. By the end of the lullaby, both were crying, not from pain this time but release. Samuel quietly slipped away, stepping out into the garden again, his hands trembling. He looked up at the sky, whispering to the wind, "She's healing now, Grace. You'd be proud." That night Alexander found Samuel sitting beneath the old oak tree, sharpening his broom handle with a small pocket knife. A quiet ritual he did every evening. "Samuel," Alexander said, his tone softer than usual. "I don't know how to thank you." Samuel smiled faintly. "You don't have to." "I do," Alexander insisted. "You did what I couldn't. What 100 doctors couldn't." Samuel chuckled softly. "You know why, sir? 'Cause I wasn't trying to fix her. I just listened. Sometimes people don't need answers. They just need someone to sit with their silence until it's safe to speak again." Alexander nodded slowly. "I've spent my life trying to buy solutions. Maybe love doesn't work like that." "It doesn't," Samuel said quietly. "It grows, like those flowers out there. You can't rush it, you can only tend to it." They sat together in silence for a while, the stars blinking above. Finally, Alexander asked, "You ever think of moving on? You could do more than cleaning streets." The Samuel smiled, eyes still on the sky. "Used to think that. But I realized something after my boy passed. It's not about doing more. It's about doing right. I clean streets because it reminds me that everything can be made new again, even broken hearts." Alexander said nothing, but the words hit deep. Days passed, and the bond between the three of them grew like the flowers in the garden. Strong, unexpected, beautiful. Lily began to talk freely now, her vocabulary catching up quickly. She'd chatter endlessly about clouds, stars, and what she'd learned from Mr. Carter's stories. One afternoon, she came running to her father with something behind her back. "Daddy, close your eyes," she squealed. He obeyed. When he opened them, she was holding a small, handmade photo frame, painted in bright colors with a picture of the three of them, her dad and Samuel sitting among the flowers. "Mr. Carter helped me make it," she said proudly. "We're family now." Alexander blinked back tears. "Family," she nodded firmly. "Yup, he's like Grandpa." Samuel burst into laughter, shaking his head. "Lord, I'm not that old, child." Lily giggled. "You have gray hair." Alexander looked at Samuel, smiling softly. "Wes, she's right." "Wish she is," Samuel said, his voice thick with warmth. That evening the sky turned golden as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Lily leaned her head on her father's shoulder, yawning softly. "Mr. Carter," she murmured, "will the flowers still grow when it's cold again?" Samuel nodded. "They'll sleep for a while, but they'll come back stronger next spring." She smiled. "Like me." He reached over and squeezed her hand gently. But the next morning brought something unexpected. Samuel didn't show up. At first Alexander assumed he was late. Then an hour passed. Then 2. By noon, concern turned to worry. Marcus made a few calls to the city maintenance office, and what he learned drained the color from Alexander's face. Samuel Carter had collapsed while working early that morning near Riverside Park. They'd taken him to the city hospital. Alexander grabbed his coat and keys immediately. Get the car. Now. The drive felt endless. When they reached the hospital, the nurse at the counter looked up in surprise as the billionaire stormed in. Samuel Carter. Where is he? The nurse hesitated, recognizing him. Room 214, sir. But he's resting. Alexander rushed down the hallway, his chest tight. When he entered the room, Samuel was lying in bed, pale, breathing shallowly but conscious. He smiled faintly when he saw them. Didn't mean to cause a fuss, he murmured. Alexander's voice cracked. Why didn't you tell me you were sick? Samuel shrugged weakly. Didn't want pity. Been feeling tired for weeks. Guess my heart's just as old as my broom. Lily climbed onto the bed, clutching his hand. Mr. Carter, you can't leave. The flowers need you. He smiled softly. No, sweetheart. The flowers have you now. Her eyes filled with tears. But I'll miss you. Samuel brushed a tear from her cheek. I'll still be here, in every sunrise, every bloom, every song you sing. You just have to look. Alexander turned away, struggling to keep his composure. Carter, he said hoarsely, you've given my daughter her life back. You've given me mine too. Samuel's eyes glistened. Then I've done enough. The monitor beside him beeped steadily. Slow, rhythmic, fading slightly. He looked at Lily one last time and whispered, keep growing, little flower. Her small hand clung tighter to his as tears fell silently onto the sheets. That evening, as the sun sank behind the skyline, a soft wind swept through the Monroe garden, rustling the tulips, bending them gently as if in farewell. And there, among the flowers, one new bloom opened overnight, golden, radiant, unlike any other. Lily saw it from her window and smiled through her tears. Good night, Mr. Carter, she whispered. The house was quiet again. But this time it wasn't the silence of sorrow. It was the silence of remembrance. A week had passed since Samuel Carter's death. The world outside went on, traffic, chatter, life. But inside the Monroe mansion, time had slowed. The morning after he passed, the staff found a small envelope on the kitchen counter. No name on it, just a single word written in Samuel's rough, careful handwriting, Bloom. Inside was a folded note and a pressed flower. Alexander opened it with trembling hands. The note read, if you're reading this, I'm gone, but don't let the house go quiet again. Tell her I said the garden still needs tending. Flowers only die when you stop believing they'll grow. SC. Alexander stared at the words for a long time, then handed the note to Lily. She traced the letters with her small fingers, whispering, he said he'd still be here. That day, Lily walked into the garden alone. The sky was pale gray, heavy with the promise of rain. She found Samuel's old broom leaning against the oak tree. His gloves were still draped over the handle. She knelt beside the golden tulip, the one that had bloomed the night he died, and placed the pressed flower from his note beside it. Then, in a voice soft but steady, she said, I'll take care of it now. The wind stirred, brushing her hair across her face. For a moment she swore she heard his voice, faint, warm, almost carried on the breeze. That's my girl. In the weeks that followed, the Monroe estate changed again, not in grandeur but in spirit. The garden became the heart of the home. Every morning Lily and her father tended to it. Watering, planting, talking, they hung wind chimes from the branches, each one engraved with a word Samuel had used to teach her patience, kindness, faith. Alexander built a small wooden bench under the oak tree, Samuel's bench, and carved 3 names into it: Grace, Samuel, Lily. When it was finished, he sat on it alone one evening, watching the sunset bleed into the flowers. I never told you thank you, he said quietly, but I hope you know. A single wind chime rang softly, though there was no breeze. Spring gave way to summer, and the garden flourished like never before. Neighbors who drove past the Monroe estate often stopped just to stare. The once cold mansion now glowed with life. Children's laughter drifted through the gates. The billionaire who once kept his world locked away now invited others in. He opened the garden to the public every Saturday, naming it the Carter Sanctuary. It wasn't a grand opening, no press, no reporters. Just a handmade sign, painted by Lily herself with crooked letters and bright colors. Welcome to the Garden of Memory, where everything grows again. People began to visit. Mothers, fathers, old men, widows, anyone who needed peace. They'd walk among the flowers, breathe the scent of earth and renewal, and sit quietly beneath the oak tree. Some cried. Some prayed, some just closed their eyes and listened to the wind. And sometimes, when the sunlight hit the golden tulip just right, it shimmered, almost glowing. Lily always said that was Samuel saying hello. One warm afternoon, Alexander found Lily sitting on the grass, sketching in her notebook. What are you drawing today? He asked. She turned the pad toward him. It was a picture of Samuel, broom in hand, hat tilted, standing in a field of flowers. But behind him she'd drawn something new: wings. Is an angel now, she said confidently, a garden angel. Alexander smiled through a lump in his throat. I think you're right. She looked up at him, her expression suddenly serious. Daddy? Yes, sweetheart. Can we plant flowers for all the people who are sad, so they can feel happy again too? He hesitated, then nodded. That's a beautiful idea, Lily. Ha, she grinned. Then we'll need a lot of seeds. That evening, Alexander called Marcus. Buy every seed packet you can find, he said. Every color, every kind. Marcus chuckled. Planting a jungle, sir? No, Alexander replied softly. We're planting hope. Within days, crates of flower seeds arrived from across the country. Sunflowers, roses, lavender, lilies, wild daisies. Lily spent hours sorting them with childlike excitement, labeling each one with tiny handwritten tags. When people visited the sanctuary, she'd hand them a seed packet and say, "Plant it for someone you love." And soon, the Carter Sanctuary wasn't just a garden, it was a movement. Families planted flowers in their own yards, schools created kindness gardens. And online, people began sharing pictures tagged with the "Bloom for Carter." What started as one man's act of compassion became a global wave of quiet beauty. One morning Alexander woke to find an envelope under his door. It was Lily's handwriting this time. Inside was a drawing, her Samuel, and him standing among golden flowers. At the top in big colorful letters, she'd written, "Happiness doesn't go away. It just grows roots." He stared at it for a long moment, his heart swelling with pride. That day, he placed the drawing in a glass frame and hung it in the hallway, right above the piano. Later that summer, Alexander took Lily to the city for the first time since her mother's death. They visited the park near the river, the same place Samuel had collapsed. Lily brought a small bag of seeds and a trowel. She found a quiet patch of grass near the water and began to dig. "What are you doing, sweetheart?" Alexander asked. "Planting for Mr. Carter," she said softly. "So he has flowers here too." When the hole was ready, she pressed the seeds into the earth and whispered something only the wind could hear. Then she stood and took her father's hand. "Let's go home." By autumn, the garden at the Monroe estate had become a legend in the community. Teachers brought children to learn about kindness and patience. Volunteers came to help maintain it. Lily had even started giving little garden talks, explaining how flowers needed love to grow, not just sunlight. Reporters eventually heard about it, of course, when they interviewed Alexander for a feature titled, "The Billionaire Who Found His Heart in a Garden." He simply said, "I didn't find my heart. Someone helped me plant it." The journalist asked, "Who?" He smiled. "A street cleaner named Samuel Carter." That night, as the stars rose above the estate, Alexander sat alone under the oak tree. Lily had long gone to bed. The garden shimmered under moonlight, the flowers swaying gently, whispering in the wind. He took a deep breath, feeling the cool air in his lungs. "You were right, Carter," he murmured. "Healing doesn't come from money or medicine. It comes from love." The wind chime labeled Faith rang softly, a single clear note that drifted through the still night. He looked up and smiled. "Good night, old friend." Inside, Lily dreamed of flowers. Endless fields of color stretching toward the horizon, and Samuel standing in the middle, waving, smiling, alive again. He knelt and whispered to her dream self, "Keep growing, little flower." She nodded and whispered back, "I will." When dawn came, the first light touched the golden tulip, still glowing, still alive. And from somewhere unseen, the wind carried a faint hum, the same melody Samuel had once sung while sweeping snow. The garden answered in rustles and whispers, and life, in all its quiet, miraculous ways, continued to bloom. 10 years later, the Carter Sanctuary was no longer just a garden. It was a legend. Every year thousands of people from across the country visited it, not to see the flowers, but to feel something they thought they'd lost. Grief-stricken parents, lonely veterans, lost souls, all of them found peace among those blossoms. And at the heart of it all, standing tall beneath the oak tree, was a young woman with bright eyes and a soft smile. Lily Monroe, no longer a little girl but a young woman of 17. Her hair, long and golden, shone like sunlight through the leaves. Every morning she walked barefoot through the garden, watering the tulips and humming the same tune Samuel once whistled. The old bench beneath the oak had weathered over the years, its wood softened by time. The carved names Grace, Samuel, Lily were still clear, though moss had begun to trace the edges. Lily often sat there before sunrise, writing letters she never sent. Letters addressed to a man she still missed. "Dear Mr. Carter, the garden's still growing. Just like you said. Sometimes when the wind moves through the chimes I feel you smiling. I hope heaven has flowers too. Your little flower." Alexander Monroe was older now, though he carried himself with a gentler air. The sharp edges of his old life, power, pride, distance, had softened into wisdom. He rarely left the estate. Instead, he devoted himself to expanding the sanctuary, building schools, and funding green spaces in low-income neighborhoods. When asked in interviews what changed him, he always said the same thing. "A man named Samuel Carter taught me that kindness outlives wealth." And when they asked about the garden's success, he'd smile and look toward Lily. "She's the real gardener. I just water what she plants." That autumn the sanctuary prepared for its 10-year anniversary. A grand celebration where hundreds of visitors, donors, and volunteers would gather to honor Samuel Carter's legacy. Lily wanted it to be perfect. She spent weeks arranging the flowers, repainting the benches, and polishing the memorial plaque under the oak tree. The plaque read, "In loving memory of Samuel Carter, the man who swept the cold away. Kindness is the seed that never dies." The morning of the celebration, the sky blazed with gold. Lily stood by the entrance, greeting guests with a warm smile. Children ran through the paths, their laughter mixing with the gentle rustle of petals. Elderly couples strolled hand in hand, whispering memories. And in the middle of it all, Alexander took the stage. He stood before the crowd holding a small, weathered broom. Samuel's broom, preserved after all these years. 10 years ago, he began, his voice steady but full of emotion. "Old man walked into my life with nothing but this broom and a heart full of grace. I thought I was helping him survive that winter. I didn't realize he was helping me learn how to live." The crowd was silent, hanging on every word. "He taught me that no act of kindness is small. That even the quietest soul can leave the loudest echo. And that love, true love, doesn't die. It blooms." He glanced toward Lily, who stood near the golden tulip, tears glimmering in her eyes. "This garden," he continued, "is his story, but it's also yours. Every flower here represents someone who chose compassion over comfort, and if he were here today, I think he'd say keep blooming." The audience rose in applause. Not thunderous, but gentle, like the sound of rain on petals. Later that evening, when the guests had gone and the lanterns flickered under the trees, Lily walked alone to the oak. The garden was glowing in twilight, reds, golds, and purples swaying like painted whispers. She sat on the bench, closed her eyes and breathed in the scent of roses and earth. "I hope you saw it, Mr. Carter," she whispered. "All of this is because of you." For a long moment there was only the soft rustle of leaves. Then, one of the wind chimes rang, a single, perfect note. She smiled. "I knew you'd be listening." That night, as she returned to the house, she found her father waiting in the hallway. He held an old leather-bound box. "I was saving this for today," he said. Lily opened it carefully. Inside was Samuel's cap, faded, frayed at the edges, and beneath it, a folded letter she'd never seen before. It was addressed to Lily. "When you're grown." Her breath caught as she unfolded it. "My little flower, if you're reading this, it means time has done what time always does. It's carried us forward. I hope you've kept your hands dirty with soil and your heart clean with kindness. I never had a daughter, but if I did, I'd want her to be just like you. Don't ever stop believing in people, even when they give you reasons to. The world will test your gentleness. Keep being gentle anyway. Love makes the earth bloom. And you, my dear, are love itself. Samuel Carter." Tears spilled down Lily's cheeks as she read the words again and again. Her father put an arm around her shoulders, his voice breaking as he whispered, "He really did love you." She nodded. "And I love him too, always." Years passed. The Carter Sanctuary grew beyond anyone's imagination. Chapters of it appeared in cities across the globe. Gardens dedicated to peace, healing, and human connection. Lily became a horticulturalist and motivational speaker, traveling to plant gardens in schools, hospitals, and war-torn communities. Everywhere she went, she carried a pouch of golden tulip seeds, descendants of the same flower that bloomed the night Samuel died. And wherever she planted them, miracles seemed to follow. Children who couldn't walk began smiling again. Grieving mothers found laughter. Strangers became friends. It wasn't magic, it was love, the kind Samuel had left behind. On the 20th anniversary of his passing, Lily returned to the original garden, her garden. The oak tree was larger now, its branches stretching high into the sky. The bench had been replaced once, but the original wood was preserved in a glass case inside the visitor center. She knelt by the golden tulip, now surrounded by hundreds of its kind, and whispered, "You did it, Mr. Carter, you changed the world." A breeze stirred. The chimes rang softly, harmonizing like a choir of angels. And as she stood, a child approached, a little boy clutching a small bouquet. "Miss Lily," he said shyly, "my mommy said these flowers can help sad people feel better. Can I give them to someone here?" She smiled warmly, kneeling to meet his eyes. "Of course you can. Who are they for?" He thought for a moment, then said softly, "For you." Lily's eyes shimmered as she took the flowers. Wild daisies, Samuel's favorite. "Thank you," she whispered. "You just made the garden grow even more." That evening, as the sun set, she stood once more beneath the oak tree. The sky blazed in colors of fire and gold. The garden glowed, and in that moment she felt him, not beside her, but within her, in every bloom, every breath, every act of kindness she'd ever known. She looked up at the heavens and whispered, "We're still blooming, Mr. Carter." And from the whispering leaves above, it almost sounded like an answer. Soft and eternal, "Always will, little flower."